today. Somehow we have a few glitches, but once more, welcome to the Relational Matters Archive. I'm very happy that we are back once more before, or kind of a little bit at the beginning of our summer break already. Sophie, thank you very much for being here today to have another conversation with us in the Relational Matters Archive. As usual, before we start, let me give a few introductory remarks to this conversation series. First of all, my name is Katrin Thiel, and I'm one of the initiators of the Relational Matters Archive, and I otherwise gender program at Utrecht University. And together with us here is also Ida Hilrup Hansen, with whom I invented and started the Relational Matters Archive during the time as a PhD student here at UU. And we continue since then with the recording of these conversations. And I could say that soon we also do this again as colleagues in the university. Often oversees the technical details for the session. And so they will also moderate the session's chat, which can be used by you as live participants. And Ida will now say a few words about that, right?
Yes, hello. Katrin, just to say, sometimes it's lacking a bit, so you fall out slightly, okay, and then you return back in, but I think people can refer to the former conversations for the full script in case the glitch is too long. So hello and welcome to listeners currently present and those who will tune in later. My name is Ida. Today, the Relational Matters Archive concludes its second series of conversations since we started it all in the spring of 2022. The session today will, as per usual, be recorded and we will upload it to the archive. Here's where it will be available, and you can also go to our webpage to learn more about the project. So each conversation is loosely structured around the same 3 questions, and it will last up until 45 minutes, followed by a 10 to 15 minutes Q&A, and we encourage all participants to share their questions or thoughts, and then I will raise as many as time allows us after the conversation. Yes.
Then let me continue, and I hope that my connection will be more stable in the next 45 minutes. I once am indeed on a different location here, so that is a bit of a challenge apparently today, technically. But before we start, always, I also introduce, of course, the interlocutor with a few more words. And before I do that, let me once more read a little bit to you what the Relational Matters Archive aims. The Relational Matters Archive aims to collect insights and divergent practices dealing with relationality as a starting point for research inquiries and ways of living. The archive is part of a project in which 2 claims are interwoven in the attempt to engage with and attune ourselves to today's planetary condition. On the one hand, that's an engagement with insistence on the interactive and messily entangled condition of our current times. And on the other hand, the statement that relation matters is meant as an ethical political wager to become more literate and maybe more carefully attuned to what entanglement as living condition implies. That is, what does such ask us when enlivening it? It's important for us to emphasize that if we say here or take a relational point of departure, a relational point of departure does not propose relationality as a solution in itself. Rather, our conversations around relational matters want to inquire what relationality can mean in specific context and also on different scales. Our conversations bring forward, and how a relational approach could offer significant insights to what's happening around, amongst, and within us. I really look very much forward now to our conversation on these matters with Sophie Withaeckx. Once more, Sophie, welcome. It's very good to see you here on screen. And to say also a few words about you as our interlocutor today. Sophie Withaeckx is in the Netherlands, and her research explores how normative understandings of humanity shape public spaces and institutions, and also how diversity and decolonization become managed in higher education. She has co-authored the book Transmigration, Social Work in a World of Superdiversity with two and she has published her work in multiple different academic journals so far. And when we met for the first time, I really also got to know Sophie via her work on intersectionality, diversity, politics, and policies, and the question of decolonization in higher education. But after a while, when we started talking to each other a bit more, I also heard that Sophie's research focuses very much on what she has called the ethics of transnational adoption, where she inquires how taken for granted notion of questions of humanness, family, and kinship underlie ethics and the practice in transnational adoption. I thought this is actually a really important topic to engage with further, and topic in the overall context and the intellectual expertise I learned about Sophie's work, that I thought this would be a great contribution to have in our archive. But that's how the invitation came about, and I was very happy when I approached Sophie then that you agreed to do a session with us here today, enriching, I believe, this archive with both a most interesting philosophical point of view, relationalities. I'm very curious, as always, to see where you will take us in the format of our online conversation on relational matters, in which we hope to attend to questions that exactly complexify notions of relationality in their praxis or practice. So I hope now that I warmed us all up sufficiently for the conversation to begin. And as usual, let's just begin with the first question that in this archive on relational matters gives us guidance. I hope that's okay, Sophie. So the first question is always, how does actually relationality figure in your work, or from which angle are you actually engaging with relational matters?
Okay, so I think I just already indicated that this is already a very big question. I think we might talk about this the full 45 minutes, maybe.
That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so what I wrote here, I think, is relationality matters on so many levels. On so many levels, also in my life, I think in anyone's life. And yeah, I had to think about the old feminist motto, the personal is political, because I believe that anyway, there are no strict boundaries between personal life and anything else. So there's already a kind of relationality there, like how the different aspects of your life kind of blur into each other, and how the personal and the relational necessarily impacts and shapes the kind of work you are doing. But in a way, I still think in academy, this is still something that is often completely ignored. So if I think about my own life and career as an academic, this was very much shaped by my situation as a single mother. And this is something I start to see actually much more now. Now I see people applying for PhD positions and other things, that people are very much judged as an academic. What have you been doing? Where are you going? And it's important that you have a kind of strategy, that you are following a certain path, that people see, oh, there was an idea, and now you have developed this in this and these ways. And then I always realized that I never had this kind of strategy in my life, because I kind of, by chance in a way, ended up in academy. That already was not like my life goal, but yeah, it just happened. I'm happy with it. But then also, I think my career developed by just taking whatever came on my path, because I had rent to pay, I had a mouth to feed, so I was never consciously thinking about, oh, I want to, I have this great idea now, and now I'm going to see how I can develop this in the next 5 or 10 years. Like that never really happened. If there was an opportunity to work in a certain project, I went there. If there was another opportunity opening somewhere and I needed the job, I went there. So I think you also heard it when you just were listing all the topics I work on or worked on. In a way,
So far.
there is a kind of connection. It's not like it's completely going in all places. But still, you see that in a way there were always opportunities that I took, but without there being a big plan. But I do see that when people then apply for positions or just want to get a job, this is something that you are really reckoned on. Which makes me think that in a way I must also be lucky to get where I was. But still, it surprises me how this aspect of how your personal life impacts on where you're going in academy is still completely neglected and can actually have heavy consequences that people don't always recognize.
Yeah.
So that's on a personal level. I think it's important to recognize that that much more. But then, of course, I'm also engaging with relationality in my work. And of course, on a theoretical and ontological level, I'm very critical, even not only critical, I reject this idea of the human being as this freestanding, autonomous individual, so the Kantian individual who can make his, not hers, laws for himself, or Hobbes citizens who sprung up like mushrooms, etc. So I think that's still also a very powerful idea also in academy, and it's something that you still find yourself struggling often. So I always think in my research that you can only understand individuals in their relationship to others, other people, also the structures you live in, the societies you live in, and that very much shapes what kind of individual you can be or what kind of subjectivity you can develop. And this also translates in my appreciation of care ethics, for example, on an ethical level, which I have been in the project on violence against women, for example, that I have been supporting. This was a very important framework also for us to work in, to see how exactly victims are surrounded by whom, how a lack of support structures in one place can lead to heavy consequences, etc. So this relationality is in a way always there, and I think you can think of it in any kind of topic that you are studying. I think you cannot do without it anyway. Yeah. Then, yeah, also on the way we construct our knowledge, like on an epistemological level, there again also it comes back in like the way how we construct our knowledge. And there again, you still have this strong idea of the lone academic genius in academy, the one who is able to think very independently and receives ideas from the sky or wherever. While you do find in a feminist work, of course, but also in other work by feminist women of color, for example, who also think from their communities, where this relational aspect of how knowledge is built is much more present and also much more true in a way to me. For example, I'm thinking about this passage in Patricia Hill Collins' work, Black Feminist Thought, where she's describing these are elements of Black feminist thinking, theorizing. There's one passage where she refers to church services. We all recognize that, not being Afro-American, I think, but we're all familiar with the way that the person in front is like singing or saying something and other people reply or ask a question. And so it goes back and forth all the time. And this for her is kind of symbolizing how knowledge in general is constructed in this community. Like you are never alone in doing something. You voice an idea and somebody else echoes it or complements it or adds or questions it. And so your knowledge builds in dialogue. So this dialogical model of knowledge building is for me also very important and interesting. But again, also something that's is not always valued in academia.
Yeah, I like very much when you are speaking about from the personal actually to the theoretical, and both, like you should say, like the epistemological and the ontological, because when I think about also the way you engage with, say, intersectionality or with a question of the colonial structure of the work, when we think of your work now in that you gave us also as a reading, then I feel the interesting dimensions I find in it is very much that you allow yourself really to bring those ideas of, say, an intersectional framework, not in just in an analytical manner, using them, but you also really show actually how they are actually related with each other in order to figure out, for example, how different or how divergent something like adoption, and I think we spoke also in the past and more about maybe how relational institutional politics or institutional policies are always. So when you now speak here in the way you now just spoke, from how you yourself find yourself ending up in certain projects and certain ideas, and how that you bring together, which is then say that actually the way also relationality figures for you as an intellectual, but also as a practitioner or as somebody who lives her life, that all of these different connections really make up your personality, the way you also look for what you want to be in academia, or what you want to be as an intellectual, or what you want to be as in political questions.
I didn't get the last part. You were falling away.
Again, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
I said that all these different parts, that I think they make you also now, of course, a certain political agent or a certain intellectual figure. And also there, I feel now the way you describe it, as if these things really come together, not only in your life, but also with the way how you use them. So your work is not only a theoretical engagement with relationality, but it's always connected to something in the way you now described it. So
yeah,
if the first question is relationality, how does it figure in your work? Then I want to say, is this correct? Is this something that you can find yourself in, how I described it?
Yeah, definitely. And in a way, again, I don't think I did that deliberately.
Yeah, that's a nice thing. It's not deliberately, yes.
But yeah, or maybe there was a kind of a deliberate element, in the sense that, I think people in this space often probably all recognize that academia can be a very toxic environment. And for me, in a way, thinking about things that really touch me, or working on things that really touch me, where I have a feeling that there I can actually be useful, or there I can do something that matters, is for me a way to survive in this environment. I can put it like that. So I think I could be okay on working on projects that were a bit more distant from me, but were, still in terms of social justice important, like violence against women, or transmigration and social work. But yeah, to manage to survive in academia, I also need something, I think, more fundamental. In a way, that's what brought me then to working on the diversity and decolonization discourse in academia. Because in a way, you see the kind of hypocrisies and the kind of contradictions and the kind of stupidities going on. And I'm not always a person to go in open conflicts with people. I am also, sometimes I just want to do my work. But then my way of interacting with that became by exploring it academically. So that's what brought me there. And the same can be said for the transnational adoption. Like I'm adopted also, but domestically, but still there's a lot of similarities and parallels. But so encounters outside of the academy made me aware of the sheer injustices taking place in that sector, and the way that this was completely ignored. So I felt like this strong compulsion to do something, and saw also the gap in academic research. And then for me, that also became a way kind of to manage this personally, but then also like make it into something that is also productive and relevant on an academic level.
Yeah. So I like what so actually the relational understanding of yourself, of your life, also brought you basically to also the questions that you're engaged with academically, and actually grounds you in return within the academia. Nice. I think we should move on to the second question. So to not, because I think we are at a moment where you maybe then from there, what we just now also maybe already explored a little bit, what do you, I mean, the methodological shift question is always which methodological shift do you see emerging from a relational approach? It sounds very, it is a very, maybe a very academically sounding question in a way, or a very, yeah, academically sounding, but actually maybe it's not. We can continue our conversation from there, but I want to nonetheless read the question. Which methodological shift do you see in a relational approach in your research or in your activism or in your daily practice now, I would say with you?
Yeah, I don't know if for me it was ever shifting, because I had this kind of closeness of working also in women's associations, in feminist associations outside of academy. And in a way, many of the topics that I then studied just came back. And so before I started my PhD, I've been working in a women's association in Antwerp with women from all places. Like, it was very nice and interesting. And yeah, so I did my PhD on honor-based violence. And then for me, there was already a kind of closeness. Not that these women were all victims of violence, of course, but the research itself was also a lot about how those women understood honor, how this changed in the context of migration, how that could lead to violence, how these victims, but also perpetrators, then interact with the system they are in. And these were all topics that were very familiar, or more or less familiar from conversations you have with these women or things you see and hear. And then doing the PhD allowed me to just go deeper in that. And indeed, that association then that I just left was also one of the starting places where I could find respondents in my research, for example. And so these principles of closeness, of I would not call my method participatory, because it was qualitative, not completely participatory, but still that way of trying to centralize the voices of these women also in my research, and collaborating in a way, because they help me, of course, to refer to other contacts, other people, etc. So this kind of collaborative approach has been there from the beginning, and I think that's something that I always took with me. So in that sense, not that much of a shift, but I think that throughout the years, and then especially in becoming more embedded in philosophy, I have left that more direct, qualitative, participatory work a bit behind now. Now I'm more working with text and discourses, which is also okay. So in that sense, there was maybe a shift that I became like less qualitative researcher and more like a text-based researcher. But still, I think I try to honor in a way the same principles, because some sources I work with now are like writings by adoptees. So it's like their voices are still very close to me. And I still try to honor them and centralize them in a way, but then in another way.
Yeah, I like that you are speaking as one dimension, as collaboration or collaborative research. I think I would absolutely agree, as a relational, as a methodological framework in relational matters, or kind of as a relational methodology. And that you also now say it's not per se the same as participatory research. I like actually what you're saying there, because it is not your collaboration. The collaborative approach, I think, goes further beyond even, a specific research question or a specific research topic that you want to do with your participants. That you say from the start, it is always already kind of collaboration or collaborative, how you research. Again, I like to come back to your methodology that I see happening in your research now on the adoption report, and how you write on it as a philosopher, in a way, because I read you maybe very clearly interested in theoretical or analytical dimensions. So when I read your work, it was interesting that you, of course, bring in emotions, affects, power, of course, but also compassion and all these words. And that's a very, so to speak, a very relationally charged understanding of what's going on. And I think that matters in how you, as a philosopher, read or think with exactly the central quotes and the central voices of adoptees. Then say I mean, I'm not saying it, maybe it's not fair, but as a social scientist would maybe, or kind of as a more descriptive oriented researcher. I don't now mean this in a bad way, how you approach it, because you approach it very analytically and very much in depth. So here I see a method, I see something like a methodological shift a little bit. Would you, can you continue from there, or do you find yourself again in this question?
Yeah, I was thinking that was, or is for me, the discovery and in a way the gift of philosophy. And then again, that's personal, I think, because as you probably know, philosophy is the most white and male of disciplines, often even worse than STEM. Why? Because people just run away screaming when they see a list full of white male men and like me, and like never thought about studying that. Like, what am I going to do there? And then in a way, I ended up in philosophy because the PhD I applied for was in philosophy and ethics. Then I had no clue like what that actually entailed. And it took me some years to get to know this field and get to appreciate it, that it's much more than dead white men, and that even those dead white men say important stuff that you can actually work with. So that's the kind of barrier that you first have to come through. And then I think at a certain moment, and then especially, of course, when I went further into feminist philosophy and discovered decolonial philosophy, it's like a world opening, and which allows you to look at things in such a different way, and indeed to probe deeper, as you say, and that it's not just like describing what people do, but actually like what is going on here. And so in the chapter I think you are referring to, that is shared among the participants, I worked with Sarah Ahmed's framework on effect. Also with Didier Fassin on humanitarianism, to like study or understand the mobilization of emotions in this whole adoption debate, because it's a very emotional debate. It's very difficult to say something, to change things, because you open up like a can of worms, and some voices are more heard than others. Some effects get mobilized in a way that are more heard or more seen as normal. And so these two frameworks, you put them together and you're like, yes, I see it now. And it's a kind of, I bet you recognize that in a way. You are writing and putting things together and you feel like, yes, now I see what's going on. I found that very satisfying. And I had the same with Sylvia Winter's work. So this is, this article that I could not share yet because it's on the review. But so I use her understanding of humanity to think about why adoptees are not taken serious when they want to search for their family. So this is often dismissed as, why are you doing this? Or you're hurting your parents, or biology is, it's just a myth, it's not important, it's a waste of time, etc. It depends a bit then on the fashion of the moment, because sometimes biology is taken seriously and then get a bit more support, but at other times it's not, to the advantage of more social constructivist ways of thinking. And this is also then something that just builds up throughout the years. So I started reading Sylvia Winter, I started working on adoption. And again, at a certain moment, you start making these connections and then you see something. And I found that, then you feel that, okay, I have to work with this. So this is very a bit magical, actually. And that's what I think what philosophy brought me, what I couldn't have found in sociology or anthropology or social work. Maybe, of course, you can find other things in other ways, but this for me was, is why I'm now very happy to be in the Department of Philosophy.
Yeah, And just to, before we have to continue to, that I think there's also this, there is what I always would also say, the way I'll try to explain how I end up with what I'm reading and what I'm working on. It is also a certain collaborate. I mean, want to come back to the collaboration of the collaborative approach, because it is, you just end up with something to think with. And in, if you find that, what you said with Ahmed in the one, Ahmed's Politics of Emotions, or Winter's question of humanness and humanity, on the other hand, you end up somehow in a collaboration much more than that is, because you said also it's not deliberate, but of course there is deliberation in it, but it's not like that you so voluntaristically from an individual standpoint think, no, okay, I am this and thus I take this object. And in that sense, I think you're indeed quite a relational thinker, although in that way, how you manage to bring indeed something of Winter's Ahmed's Politics of Emotions towards a very concrete analysis that you're producing in those chapter, for example, in this chapter that you gave us. So I think there is a methodological aspect very much in it, because that one has to do that. This is done somehow in a chapter by you. So thank you. I think we have to move on to the third question, and that is from always, we want to also speak a little bit about the dangers or tensions or limitations of taking relationality as so central or as a starting point for our research and research endeavor, or your own practice or praxis, wherever you want to take us with that.
Yeah, I think an obvious challenge is in academy to not be taken seriously. I think there's still this positivistic bias. I think it depends a bit on where you are, of course. I cannot say it bothers me that much, but still it is there. I think I see it merely with starting researchers and students also, who are not giving these tools from feminist theory often to think differently about objectivity. They are generally very much like framed in this positivistic framework. I shouldn't be biased, I shouldn't have an opinion, this and that. And this is something you really have to, almost beat out of them. Don't want to be violent, but yes. Often, when I then make them read Sandra Harding or anything else, like thinking differently about objectivity, they're often like awakening and like, oh, I can be a person, I can have an opinion. So that's very important, and I think there's a real lack in our academy now to offer students these tools. So as a researcher, when you want to go that way, you have a lot of catching up to do. That was also my case. Like I never heard of feminist theory before I started my PhD. So you have to learn this all yourself. So it's a bit disheartening even now in 2023 that this is still so much lagging behind, or that we do not give students the tools to know that, well, there's also something else. I don't say that everybody should do this, but at least you should offer this to students, and then they can make their own choice and can start in time. So even in PhD defenses, I saw it that the researchers are being questioned critically of being too biased, etc., which is totally inappropriate. So I think there's still a large struggle to do in academia.
Yeah, that's a nice, that's a good way of, I mean, not nice, but it is an important one. Sometimes nearly not forget it really in my practice, but of course being long enough in a gender studies environment, I feel there's a privilege to this kind of, that you create this community. But it's absolutely true that that it is always still if you say the person is political, it isn't as challenging to the institutional order as it was in the 1970s when it kind of, 60s, 70s when it came up. So that's a good reflection on limitations. Also, of course, in the sense of then, what do we do about it? And so, what do you think? Because you're so engaged with diversity and decolonization in higher education, what do you do about it? in your, what do you think you do about it, so to produce, to give a different atmosphere to your students?
Yeah, well, the only thing you can do is when you got the occasion to shape the curriculum, of course, to offer this in your courses, to make it a part of your courses. Still, it's not always as easy as it looks like. I also feel the limitations. I'm coordinating some courses at Maastricht University now, but yeah, even there, you're always in a framework. You cannot put everything in your course, so there's still some limitations, but still, even if it's just one article that you can put in there to make students see that there is something else, even if it's just one session that you can talk about it, then do that. And of course, if you have more power, you can have a whole course on qualitative research and feminist methods. And yes, of course, do that, please. But also on a more individual level, when you get student supervisions or when you have PhDs that you supervise, of course, then you can even go more in depth. And then it's for an individual research, but these researchers can also have a high societal impact. So there's also a lot of work that you can do.
Exactly. And what I again think of your specific research then I also think that what is important about these, of course, these showing that there are alternatives and that there are other ways of knowing and doing research. It's also not in order to say they are per se just good. I think one has to also know how to do them. So that's where I, for example, if we could go once more back to your adoption research, I'm very impressed by the discussion that you say, you open this up and, there's a whole, one can barely say something, but actually you say a lot, and you say a lot in very different ways. So I feel what feminist or, otherwise, not so objectivized methodologies or ways of knowing allow us is to actually make more differentiations rather than less differentiations about how a situation look, how a matter is actually to be engaged. So while you clearly speak about the abusive potential of the adoption system, and you speak of transnational adoption, you also at the same time have no problem saying that it's not for everybody, of course, a problem. That it's not for everybody, that people can have very different experiences with that system. And I think always it's important to, if we want to introduce an alternative to the objectivized knowledges, then not in order to say there is another homogeneous, universal, one thing solution, but actually different methodologies allow us then also to see much more differentiated, because we see much more related aspects.
Yeah, I think that's also an important lesson, not only from intersectionality, but decolonial theory in general, that we should be very careful not to reproduce the same binaries. That often can happen in oppositional thinking, that you have A and then we go towards B, and then
Exactly.
you kind of continue the same binary. It's also not a kind of dialectical thinking in the sense that, okay, now we dissolve A and B and we come to like a brave new world. But
yes, exactly.
Yeah, this message that there's always and there will always be plurality and differences and yeah, that's a good moment.
The cat has to walk through the screen. That's absolutely great, because whenever you have an online session, there's a cat. That cat has to walk through the
screen. Yeah.
Please finish your.
Continue. So I was saying that this recognition of plurality is very important. I think that does not prevent you from having one vision, one clear vision. I think for me, like social justice is like an important guiding value. Again, you do not have to have like one monolithic definition, but you can have like a conglomeration of meanings around that. But still, that does create some unity and some direction. I think that's important. I also always say, when people complain, this diversity in the classroom, etc., how to deal with it, I think there's one important guideline: human rights. It's not perfect, but it's there. It's the best we have. We don't have to say it's set in stone, but I think it's very important and very useful when you have difficult conversations to say like, okay, this is the red line. We do not cross that. for the rest you can say whatever. But if you cross the red line also, then you don't belong here in this classroom. So yeah, I think, yeah, how to say it? So a kind of plurality of meanings and experience and knowledge. I say this recognition is important, but at the same time you can make choices in terms of values or in terms of where you want to go.
Great. I think actually we are perfectly timed to conclude that part of our three question and answers or question and conversation model. I really like that we actually had quite a few terms that I really like coming up, and I want to just repeat them. I think you started off with the question of how deliberate a relational approach can be, and all kind of, the question of deliberateness or kind of deliberation, I think is very nice to have here. Then I definitely think collaboration or collaborative modi. And of course, now the plurality, I think, are very important aspects for me also in terms of what a relational starting point offers. And I like very much how you always brought in the personal and the political vision, the personal life or existential condition, but also the political vision. So with that, I would like to have Ida back, and maybe we'll have a couple of questions before we have to conclude our 10th conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for this really interesting and exciting conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, as usual, I will invite people to share their thoughts and questions. But as we wait for that, I might have one to share. So I really enjoyed reading your text that you shared with us today, Sophie. It was exciting in its detailed analysis, and now you mentioned Ahmed already and your use of analytic framework. I was really taken by your use of this notion of the adoptee killjoy and how that kind of passes out these different relations of dependency, or how this sort of the new colonial nation state project and at a more individual level of self-perception or selfhood needs sort of a passive other to confirm itself. And so those relations, those productive relations in some way, and how the adult agent of or the adult adoptee disrupts those, I thought was a really interesting analysis. I guess I'm just curious to have you, share with us here a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, well, I must say that I think when writing this chapter, this is actually something that inspires me now to go on this very relational aspect of the relation between parents and children and how problematic that can be. And so I started thinking about this notion of love, because indeed love is one of the emotions that is the most mobilized by parents. And then with this, I can also go beyond adoption, but I'm actually trying to elaborate my research now on all kind of forms of family formation, which, as you probably also know, kind of use of assisted reproductive technology is kind of exploding. Children are being produced literally to satisfy the demands of parents. There's a huge lack of reflection on how this affects children, which I find absolutely astonishing. But yeah, this mobilization of love, we do this because we love the children are loved, so it doesn't matter where they come from or what they are made of, etc. So it's used in a way, so fetishistically, as Ahmed uses it, to erase the whole machinery that goes behind it. Like, this does not just happen naturally. There are ideas and assumptions and ideologies at work. There are a lot of deliberate actions taking place to bar these children then to access information that actually belongs to them. So this is all not innocent. And I found that kind of love very problematic, because what you are doing is not recognizing a child as a whole, although you claim to love it, but you produce something that serves your desires and interests, and you refuse to recognize that that child has a past, that that child has genetic cells that come from another person, no matter what value you attach to it. But a child may, or an adult may, attach value to it, we know, and it's not you to judge that. Yes, so this is something I'm now very recently thinking about, like, what kind of love is that? And how can we think differently about love, and about love that does not reproduce these kinds of things, a kind of love that enables children to be a full person in all their complexity. And there again, yeah, this is just so very incipient. So, but I recently gave a presentation about that, where I made use of Cela Sandoval's work, Methodology of the Oppressed, where I didn't expect it actually, but there is this part where she talks about love, which I found very interesting. And that is, and she relies on Roland Barthes, whose work then, yeah, I still have to read because I got interested in that. But where she talks about love as a kind of disruption, that if love is something, yeah, that you, if you don't want to be that kind of problematic love, then love is something that kind of, yeah, also causes some discomfort, because now you're faced with a person and you want to accept that person in their fullness and in their complexity. So that puts you out of your comfort zone, and maybe should want to make you think differently about how the world is made up, and makes you want to change your perceptions, and guides you to a kind of different consciousness. So that I found very interesting, and I think there's also much interesting things to learn then from these relationships between parents now, adoptive parents, also other types of parents who kind of now produce their children. But what do they do when they become faced with a child that speaks up and wants them to be more than just, yeah, the kind of desired child that they were meant to be? Yeah.
Yes, fascinating. Yeah. I have many. I would love to respond to it, but actually there is another question here. It would be great to also get it involved. So this is from Veronica saying, "Thank you. I wonder if you could say more about the possibilities of creating relations between the parenthesis white male, in parenthesis discipline of philosophy and feminist theory, decolonial theory, etc. In the very constraining context that is academia. Speaking from my personal experience in the German academic context, I feel that the discipline of philosophy, quote, resists influences from such approaches a lot more than, for example, sociology, which of course was also founded by white male thinkers."
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think that would depend on the sociological department, but sociology can also be very problematic. Yeah, I think that's a struggle. I don't have ready-made answers to that. My strategy is just, if you get the chance to do your thing, just do your thing, you know. Don't try to convince your colleagues if they are not interested. For me, the important thing is to get space to do my thing. And I have the luck, I must say, with my philosophy department, where there are a lot of white men, but who are really great and give me the space to do my thing, and listen to me when I say something, and also learn from me as I learn from them. So it is possible if you find the right kind of supportive colleagues, and then it doesn't matter whether they are male or female or anything else. Or, I don't know, if they give you the space to do your thing, then just go for it. Then on a theoretical level, I think this kind of relationality is actually already much stronger than is conceded. I feel there's a lot of anxiety now around decolonial theory. I had some kind of uncomfortable conversations lately with some white colleagues about it because they think, oh, it's polarizing and it's binary and the West is bad and etc. So also a kind of projection of very simplistic ideas. But when you read decolonial theory, you see that the whole thing is a very deep conversation with white male philosophy. It's a dialogue, it's a reaction to it, it's a response to it. It also cannot be different, because this way of thinking has impacted our own world, the whole world. You cannot get around it. And so you always find people engaging with white male philosophers. You find Spivak engaging with Derrida or with Foucault. Like I said, Sandoval in this book is very much engaging with Barthes. So I found this conversation going on in his works all the time. And that is something that is, for people who don't know the work, the actual work, they just don't know or don't realize that it's actually a very productive conversation. But as Sandoval then also deplores in her work, so she says, well, there's actually a lot of parallels between the work done by Black feminist activists and scholars of color and white in the United States. And then the work done by postmodern scholars like Foucault and Barthes in France and on the continent. And the Black feminist scholars recognized that and found it very useful. And the white men pretend like, oh, we're so alone. We're the only ones thinking this. So I find it kind of funny how she
interesting,
remarked it and criticized on it. That indeed, I think there's an openness from a lot of decolonial scholars to have that dialogue, but that's not always mutual, unfortunately. And
or one can say, speaking from different positionalities in that sense, you're more attuned of how relational things are, how you are closed off because you think like exactly of what you spoke before as the master genius thinking and trying to explain the world to themselves as it often is. Sorry, I interrupted, I think.
No, it's
Did
okay.
I interrupt you? No, it's okay. Good.
Yeah. But I think as an individual researcher in academy, I think sometimes you have to choose your battles. And I personally find it more useful to focus on my own research than to try to convince people that do not want to listen anyway. There may be times when you want to do that more, but I also think for your own sanity that you do not always have to push it. Like if you get any space to do your research and then to bring in these ways of thinking in your way, then do that. I think you can also do a lot already like this.
Thank you. Wonderful. Since we want to keep our format, it's time to conclude our great session. I really want to thank you, Sophie, for sharing with us your thoughts
Thank you.
on these matters, and also shifting so nicely between work, philosophy, but also life and